Hello, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live discussion, Navigating the Evolving Landscape of Data Privacy Regulations, brought to you by Optiv, the Cyber Advisory and Solutions Leader. I'm Carl Fishkin, Vice President and General Manager for Optiv's Data Governance, Privacy, and Protection Practice. And I'm joined here today by Spencer Kint and Jennifer Mahoney. Spencer and Jennifer are two of our data privacy subject matter experts, and they're here to share their thoughts and wisdom. Today's session is part of Optiv's participation in Data Privacy Week, a week focused on educating users. For those that don't know, Data Privacy Week is an outgrowth of Data Protection Day, which was created in April 2006 to commemorate the signing of Convention 108 on January 28, 1981, the first ever international treaty dealing with data privacy and its protection. Today's topic, Navigating the Evolving Landscape of Data Privacy Regulations, seeks to explore tips and insights on how to assess your current state, establish your data privacy goals, and build a workable model to ensure your organization is respecting individuals' data privacy. Over the past 5 years, we've seen exponential growth in international and domestic data privacy laws, creating a patchwork of regulations and requirements across the globe. At the root of these regulations is the concept of respect, respecting consumers, respecting employees, respecting third parties, respecting the data. This is achieved by providing transparency, choice, and control regarding the way organizations collect, use, and share individuals' personal information. So I'd like to begin today's discussion by asking Spencer and Jennifer to introduce themselves. Spencer?
Thanks, Carl. Spencer Kint. I'm a senior manager here at Optiv in our data governance, privacy, and protection practice. I have about 10 years of experience in the privacy space and primarily have been consulting throughout my career. So look forward to the time here.
And Jennifer?
And I'm Jennifer Mahoney. I am a consultant on the team here with Spencer, and I'm currently in a consulting role. Prior to joining Optiv, I also served in a corporate privacy role. So I've kind of seen both sides of that.
Excellent. Well, we're pleased to have you both here with us. And let's jump into the conversation with a simple question. And I'll start with you, Spencer. What are we seeing in the data privacy space today?
Thanks, Carl. The short answer is we're seeing a lot. Privacy over the last couple of years has evolved and migrated from an after the thought kind of compliance activity to something that's driving business decisions and requiring a lot of focus and attention. But right at this particular moment, being in January 2023, we're seeing a lot of movement in the regulatory space. I'm sure a lot of those that are on here have just had a mad dash to the finish line here for the CPRA and the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act that became effective on January 1st of this year. So there's a little bit of a rush for a couple of reasons. One being that there's always a lot to handle in the space. But there's a lot of obligations and we all have our day jobs right on top of regulatory readiness type of projects. But with that, some of these requirements have evolved over the past couple of months. We've seen enforcement action, particularly out of the state of California, that has reprioritized a couple of requirements, specifically as it relates to global privacy controls and recognizing those types of preferences and signals on websites to opt out of things. And we have more privacy regulations that are coming out later this year. So we have Colorado and Connecticut on July 1st, and looks like we get another end of year, beginning of the year regulation coming in effect thanks to Utah on December 31st. So can't think of a better way to celebrate New Year's Eve, right? But there's quite a bit, particularly in the regulatory space that we're focusing on right now.
And Spencer, what are you seeing in terms of your clients? Are people ready for all these deadlines and these critical dates?
So we're seeing a couple of things, I'd say on a spectrum. I have a couple of clients and a couple of projects where due to the expanding scope of these regulations, a lot of organizations, this is a little bit of a new territory for them. So for organizations that may be a little bit smaller and a little bit more local in terms of their operational scope, they haven't fallen subject to some of these regulations and those types of things. So it's a little bit of more of a lift for them. For some of our other clients, they have a strong foundation in place, but it still requires a significant level of effort. Particularly, one example that comes to mind here is given the revised CPRA requirement to expand from opt-outs from do not sell to do not share. So a lot of organizations were able to navigate their way away from that requirement because they didn't sell personal data as long as it in accordance with the definition of that law. But since the scope was expounded, most, if not all, organizations share data. So there's quite a bit of due diligence that needs to take place to understand not just what data we have and how we're using it, but where are we transferring it, who are we transferring it with, how do we approach our third-party processes to identify these types of transfers a little bit more proactively. So there's quite a bit of work there and varying levels of maturity, but we're all on our privacy journey, and there's always something to focus on from a privacy perspective.
For sure. Jennifer, what are you seeing with your clients in the data privacy space?
Sure. So like Spencer said, a bit of a rush here the last several weeks, months, days in some cases. And there's a bit of a shift that companies are going through as consumers have become more aware of their data and the value that is attached to that, the value that companies can get. And so, consumers are with this increased awareness, are gaining some power. And companies are responding to that. While California and Virginia have legislated consumer rights, companies are, in some cases, granting those rights to everyone. I sit in a state that is not California or Virginia. I sit in the state of Washington. And while Washington has repeatedly moved some consumer privacy legislation through the legislation, it hasn't passed quite yet. I expect to see it come around again, but companies are recognizing the power that consumers have, and consumers are more aware. And with that, the relationship changed a little bit. Consumers demand respect, and with that, they want control. And so we're working with companies to protect their business interests, but at the same time put the consumer first and put the data at the forefront of their decisions, and consumer make sure the consumer perspective is taken into account.
So when I think about all the change that's going on and all these deadlines that are coming up and the impact it's having on users and business to business in many cases as well, Spencer, how do you advise clients to navigate this evolution of the regulations and to be able to react to all these changing things? And we're just talking US here. There's also the global aspects of this as well.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of requirements, and it's difficult to track, which states are coming out with new laws and what those requirements may entail. We're seeing a lot of overlap between the requirements. And generally, when we are advising our clients, we try to streamline and simplify. And we estimate that about 80% of the requirements have some level of overlap. And so what we've done is we've created a proprietary framework here at Optiv where we try and consolidate those requirements into overlapping requirements. There's also other industry frameworks that are out there that are fantastic. But we generally recommend that we start with understanding those requirements, focus on those requirements, and as we need to adapt those requirements or processes, I should say, or operations as we build them out to address those requirements, try and right-size those to address whatever regulations are in scope. And then once we have that strong foundation in place and we have those processes and capabilities defined to address those regulatory requirements, instead of having to do a whole new project over and over and over every time a new law passes, we have a strong foundation and we're really only solving for the deviations or the changes in a law rather than doing a wholesale programmatic change. And so that's one way we try and limit the burden here of a project and try and minimize the level of effort and time it takes to address with each and every new requirement as they come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting approach, right? You're not trying to boil the ocean with that approach. So that seems to resonate with the clients. They're able to tackle it in those smaller chunks.
Yeah, no, it's been good. It's overall trying to migrate kind of our mindsets from more of a proactive compliance type of mentality to being a little bit more proactive. As we do that, right, like you said, Carl, it's a little bit more smaller in chunks. It's a little bit more manageable. We don't have to have these big kickoffs or these big projects that are significant in terms of operations and headcount and resources and finances, those types of things. And it also gives us an opportunity to start a little bit earlier, right? Because if we see what's coming down the road and we understand the changes that are there, then suddenly it's not so big and we can kind of focus on other things. And so overall, well received, absolutely.
Right. And I'm curious, Spencer, when you look across different clients of different sizes, different industries, different types of businesses, do you find that this approach works across the board?
Yes, I do. So I'd say across the board it works. Now, naturally, no two organizations are going to be the same. So what we try and do is start with a little bit more of a template, if you will, and then right size that template to an organization's specific needs and requirements. Because as you kind of highlighted there, Carl, every organization is going to have a different business model. Some of them might be a little bit more direct to consumer and naturally probably have a little bit more personal data as part of their business operations. Our friends that are more B2B focused probably won't have as much personal data. But they still have some obligations, but might not be as pervasive or complex. And then requirements might also vary industry to industry, right? Those that are in more of a healthcare setting, there's some other requirements and obligations there, specifically thinking of HIPAA and some other things, at least domestically here in the US. But they're going to have different operations, collecting different types of data. Different types of data are going to have different, varying levels of sensitivity and risk. And so with that, we want to, and there's no hard and fast requirement that everything has to be the same across clients. So we really try and right size things. There's a spectrum, right? There's a good, better, best type of mentality. And so for those that want a complex automated program with technology support, that's an option. For those that are, saying the minimum has a little bit of a negative connotation, but just doing absolutely what we need to do, that's certainly a viable option as well. So whatever works best for our clients is what we try and do.
Great. Well, thanks. And Jennifer, I'm going to take us back to something you mentioned or something we talked about with consumer sentiment. And, as that changes, as the regulations change and as the sentiment changes, what does that mean for business evolution?
Yeah, it's really critical to kind of keep your pulse on consumer sentiment, as we mentioned. And there are a lot of surveys, kind of studies, so to speak. The marketing side of things needs to stay abreast of what the consumer is really interested in, and what we're really seeing from a privacy perspective. Their global surveys show that like 75% of consumers now recognize the value of their data as their property, and that maybe trading that data for convenience isn't a path that they want to continue on. Of course, we have folks who are all about sharing their data and putting their life out there and their information out there to see what comes back at them, and recognizing that information is an asset to the companies that they share it with, to yourself and to the companies that you share it with. People are changing who they purchase from when they realize that their data has been shared in maybe a way that they didn't intend, or data that they didn't realize companies had, and they start receiving marketing information, or of course our devices that are listening to our conversations. We kind of don't realize that how that's going to come back to us. And we see these opportunities coming at us more and more. So kind of alongside that recognition of that increased consciousness of what it means to share your data with a company, companies then are, like I said, kind of giving consumer rights where the legislation is trailing, recognizing that that's the right thing to do. And Spencer, you talked about proactivity and companies kind of shifting, getting into that proactive mindset. Legislation by definition trails, trails innovation, it trails whatever's happening in the world around us. But kind of keeping your pulse on the consumer sentiment and kind of the direction, not just here in the U.S. but globally, will help position you, for growth, not just of your business, but maturity as regulations change.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how this continues to evolve for sure.
Mm-hmm.
while you were speaking, Jennifer, we actually got a couple of questions. So I thought maybe we would jump in on a couple of audience questions, and one of them, I think goes back to something that Spencer was saying previously about, we got all these pending regulatory changes, but what impact does that have on data monetization?
It's a great question. So the CCPA originally had some requirements and addressed the financial consideration for certain data and how to monetize it and offering different prices and services. So I would say that in short, the regulations don't explicitly prohibit it, but there is some considerations as a part of that. And one consideration as part of the CPRA is to conduct regular privacy risk assessments, or more commonly referred to as a privacy impact assessment. So I would just encourage and advise that as we think through that, we just ensure whenever there's a new use case for personal data, we're just making sure that we evaluate the permissibility of that, and we're consulting with our friends in legal, making sure that our interpretation is appropriate, and if that's the direction we want to go, that's aligned appropriately with the representations we've made in our privacy notice and those types of things. And to me, the question isn't more of a can or can't we, it's more of a should or shouldn't we. And how will our, kind of like Jennifer was saying, what is the sentiment that our consumers may feel or experience as a part of that if we were to go down that path? So, for example, if we start monetizing that, but that's a complete shock to our consumers or individuals that we do business with, might not be the best option, right? But if we're transparent about it, we're upfront about it, consumers understand the value exchange there associated with the data and the consequences of exchanging that data. So which might be positive. Hey, I get the service for free, but my data is being monetized, and it's an ad-supported platform as a result. That's not the worst thing in the world to do, right? So in summary, not a ton of hard and fast guidance as to whether we can or can't, but from more of a brand protection standpoint, I want to just think through those use cases as they come up.
Great, thanks, Spencer, and hopefully that helped one of our audience members with the question. I want to pivot back to some of the questions that we had prepared. And in my opening remarks, I mentioned respect. And in fact, respect is actually the theme for this year's Data Privacy Week. And so I want to pick up on that a little bit and talk about, how important respect is for consumers, right? And Jennifer, if I can come back to you, is, how do you help clients establish a model for respect?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I think this kind of comes back to what we were talking about in the recognition of consumer rights, even where those aren't necessarily legislated, and where consumers recognize the value of their data and recognize the offering, the position of companies who do put consumers first and consumer data first. When we are working with our clients in order to kind of help build that model, first of all, a company needs to understand what data they have so that they can protect it, so that they can be transparent about the way they collect it, what they do with it, who they share it with, if they're sharing it. And sometimes that involves technology. We'll talk with our clients about, kind of current practice and how a technology solution might give more structure around what they're currently doing and help kind of progress their maturity level of a privacy practice, and understanding the regulations, the regulatory obligations that apply. That's important in order to be able to kind of take the position of, what can we do as an organization to meet our regulatory obligations, but still put that consumer first, put the individual first whose data we have. And we're talking a lot about consumers. One thing we also want to recognize is that employees gained rights in the state of California with respect to their personal information here with the CPRA, employees and B2B relationships as well. So kind of, putting all of that into perspective and prioritizing decisions. We want to talk through the current state, but then also, how to position yourself in order to build those relationships. It's cheaper to keep the customer you have than it is to go get new ones, right?
For sure. For sure. So Spencer, I'm going to bring this over to you now. And how do you recommend clients establish a framework of respect?
So there's a couple options we can go. Typically, what we recommend is we have a 9-domain framework where we try and, again, capture those overlapping requirements and streamline. And there's a lot of times there's overlaps with other organizations or parts of the organization, I should say, that are relevant. So as cliche as it sounds, and some of you probably heard this before, but in order to have privacy, you have to have security, right? You don't have to have privacy in order to have security. So being that security is paramount, right? That's one of those domains that we would focus on, the data protection space. And as part of that, as we are all familiar and see breaches coming, quite frequently these days, the regulations have requirements related to those types of things. The regulations require that we have strong technical controls to safeguard and protect data and protect against unauthorized disclosure and those types of things. So in the event of a breach or that identities were compromised, there's regulatory consequences for that in the realm of enforcement. So, but we've been talking a lot about regulations and requirements, but also within that 9-domain framework, we want to also incorporate industry best practices, because a lot of times the regulations tell you what you have to do, but they don't always tell you how you need to do it. And so a lot of times there's a couple of requirements, but maybe in order to address those requirements, there's other processes that are necessary or will help us get to address those requirements. But as a best practice, it helps address those efficiently. So within those, we try and address, kind of streamline and simplify, like I said earlier. But the only other point I'll call out here is that we, along with security, also try and incorporate some data governance, because we often see privacy very intertwined with data governance and data protection as well. Because in order to maximize the utility of a data privacy program, you have to know what data you have, which is the core component of data governance. So you can understand how it's processed, where it's stored, where it's being transferred, and all those fun things. So again, there's a variety of frameworks out there, and they're all relatively powerful in consolidating those requirements and really serving as a roadmap to guide the direction of a privacy program, and really help kind of build that blueprint for what we need and where we want to go.
Yeah, I really it resonates when you say governance and protection to go along with privacy. I mean, that's the name of the group that we were part of, and I just want to emphasize, that connective tissue amongst those three items is so important. If you try to tackle any one of them independently, you could really run into problems. If you don't know where your sensitive data is, it's really hard to protect it. It's really hard to govern, to respect it, as we've been saying in this. So now that's great. Okay, I'm going to take another audience question. And this one, Jennifer, I'm going to throw at you. And that is, why do privacy regs vary so much from state to state and country to country?
That's a great question. And the short answer is that here in the United States, we don't have a federal encompassing privacy law. In the last year or two, there's been some good momentum. The American Data and Privacy Protection Act is still alive. It's being renegotiated, some aspects of it being renegotiated. And while we have sector-specific laws, we do not have that federal unifying baseline. And so states have, now this has occurred over the years. There has been, kind of talk and a little momentum, and then it doesn't happen. So states have taken it unto themselves in order to pass legislation that they feel is important to their residents. And so we see California, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, coming, Utah. And all of these, the US activity in this space has kind of trailed Europe's model, right? The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, kind of set the stage for not just the United States, but around the world. We see other countries enacting similar legislation. And so, I mentioned that by definition, legislation kind of trails innovation. It's not just in the privacy space, it's everywhere, right? And we really see as innovation is exploding with, smart things, Internet of Things, AI and machine learning, and all the new applications for these things, privacy questions come to the top, right? And so that's kind of the space that we're in right now, is very reactionary. It's impossible to be proactive as much as we may need to be to make things easy for everyone. But that's kind of the state we're in at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Do you see that changing?
In what sense? I do think
a national law, for example.
I think we will eventually get to a federal law here in the United States. I'm not sure that it'll have the teeth that some people wish. And of course, state preemption is a question because that's, states don't want the teeth that their legislation has to be taken away by a federal law that a whole lot more parties need to get on board with, right? So I think it'll happen. I think it'll take some time, but I think it'll happen.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. We'll have this conversation a year from now, and we'll see where we're at. Okay, well, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to go to my last question, and this will be for both Spencer and Jennifer. And in 30 seconds to a minute, tell me, Jennifer, what does the future look like for privacy, and what does 2023 look like?
Well, we've been talking about regulations here at the end, and that's what we're going to see is, in addition to maybe some federal momentum, states will continue to legislate on their own with and without some federal, maybe kind of taking that federal perspective in place, in consideration. And, I mentioned the innovation and technology. There's a lot of change happening. So we'll see things kind of reacting to those aspects.
Excellent. And Spencer, what are your thoughts on the future?
Absolutely. I think now that we've seen a lot of these privacy laws come out, to me, one of the biggest questions is going to be enforcement. I think it'll be interesting to see how that strategy plays out. Are regulators going to go after some of the bigger players that have been subject to enforcement action before? Are they going to go across industry? What size of organization are they going to target? We've seen a little bit of enforcement for CCPA, so curious to see how that's going to work out. Internationally, there's a tentative framework in place between the United States and the EU for cross-border data transfers. Some privacy advocates have already promised legal action as it relates to challenging the legality of that framework. So curious to see kind of how that plays out and what goes there. And then I think privacy is going to continue to be at the forefront of consumers' minds. And I think as the calendar changes and we move forward, I think we're going to continue to see awareness increase, and privacy is going to become more of an opportunity to be a business differentiator and to help really drive home the value of privacy with consumers.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. This time has just gone so fast. I know we can keep going and talking about this topic for quite a long time. But for today's LinkedIn Live session, Jennifer, Spencer, I'd like to thank you both for your comments today and your thoughts on data privacy. And thanks to all our audience members and participants for joining Optiv during Data Privacy Week for this LinkedIn Live. Thank you.